It is unreasonable of the Conservatives to exploit a worldwide problem, pretending it only happens here.
This Chancellor has proved to be no better than the rest of his colleagues.
To hear the Prime Minister speak, you'd almost think that the problem of bad housing had been solved.
What they're putting forward is not even a patchwork, it's just fiddling with a thing. They're not doing it properly.
What the Conservatives have done is to exploit a perfectly natural, deep concern we all share about industrial relations by making these totally irresponsible speeches.
How long, O Lord? How long? How long is how long? But the Chancellor, this Chancellor, has proved to be no better than the rest of his colleagues. He based his budget in 1969 on the promise of the reform of industrial relations. He abandoned his prices and incomes policy, which he had said was essential to his whole economic strategy, but he said, we put in the place of it the reform of industrial relations. But when his colleagues surrendered to the unions, he didn't resign himself. He abandoned then the proposals for industrial reform as well. And instead of reform, we have had more and more unofficial strikes. And to this, the Chancellor of the Exchequer became an accessory for the fact. And the result has been a wage explosion. And that wage explosion has been trying to keep up with soaring prices and with roaring taxes. And in his 1970 budget, his surrender was complete. He sat back and did nothing about prices. He merely stated that wages could not go on increasing as they were for long. How long? How long, O Lord? How long? How long is how long? Well, until October was evidently too long. But until June, might just be managed.
To an ordinary man, there doesn't seem much difference between your industrial relations policy and the government's as far as enforceable contracts are concerned. Is there a great difference?
Well, enforceable contracts is only one part of the reform of industrial relations. And what I'd like to emphasize, first of all, is that what we're putting forward is a comprehensive plan for the reform of industrial relations and giving both employers and those who work in industry a better deal. Now, as far as enforceable undertakings are concerned, there is a difference between ourselves and the government. The first is, of course, that what they're putting forward is not even a patchwork, it's just fiddling with a thing. They're not doing it properly because last year they abandoned the real attempt to do it. But on enforceable contracts, we say it will be presumed that contracts are going to be enforceable unless it is decided otherwise by both sides. Now, this is a very important difference from what the government is putting forward.
But whichever view of a contract you have, it still has to be accepted by both parties, by the employees and the employers. What makes you think that unions that have been vocal in the opposition to enforceable contracts are going to accept your policy?
Because they know perfectly well, as unions have found in other countries, that it's to the benefit of themselves and their men to do so. You see, if the employer has security for his production, for his investment, for his planning, then he's prepared to pay higher wages for it, because he knows he's going to get better production, better results, and they will come to time. And so, as I've said, he can keep his export contracts. It's worthwhile for the employer, therefore, to pay higher wages if he gets a contract which is going to be observed. But you know, I think there's no need to be legalistic about this. I think the great majority of people in this country find it very difficult to understand why, when an employer and a union make a contract, they shouldn't expect to keep to it. Why should we work on the basis that it's going to be broken? It's a very strange form of contract or agreement, isn't it?
But you think, finally, that the unions will see the manifest advantages you've been putting forward?
I'm quite sure they will. And if you look at United States experience, you'll find that the gains there have been immense.
What the Conservatives have done is to exploit a perfectly natural, deep concern we all share about industrial relations by choosing, whenever he thinks there's political advantage, in making these totally irresponsible speeches and in making proposals which haven't been very carefully worked out, which depending on what he does mean by them, could totally wreck our system of industrial relations, our ability to get agreements, our ability to keep industrial peace.
Some of your colleagues and the trade union leaders were accusing you precisely of doing that last year when you tried to get your...
Last year what we did was to try and deal first with the who does what dispute. We said if the TUC would themselves take powers, and they're far better at dealing with their own unions than any system of law can be, then we would let them do it without our law. They did that. We still couldn't reach agreement on wildcat strikes. In the end, at Downing Street, they came forward with their own proposals, giving new powers to the General Secretary, to Mr. Feather, and the recent newspaper stoppage. The whole of our newspapers have been stopped, some would never have published again, were solved by those means and those means alone because of the Downing Street Agreement. Under the Conservative proposal, there'd be no way of stopping that.
But are you claiming that industrial relations have improved since you reached that agreement with the TUC last year?
I'm claiming, and this has been said, I think, by independent people, that some 2 million man-days that would have been lost have been averted. Stoppages have been averted, and certainly we can point to some very big disputes that couldn't have been stopped in any other way. Certainly, industrial relations are going through a very, very difficult phase, not only in Britain, but on a far worse scale in nearly every other advanced country in the world. I think, therefore, it is unreasonable of the Conservatives to exploit a worldwide problem, pretending it only happens here, pretending it wouldn't happen here if they were to import their American-style strike legislation from America, where, of course, it's manifestly failed and broken down in its attempt to prevent strikes. The American record's far worse than ours. Why import it here?
In spite of the helicopter, it was electioneering in the old style for Mr. Thorpe at Ladywood. There were hugs for babies and kind words for old ladies. The large and youthful crowd was suitably impressed. There wasn't a heckler in sight. Mr. Thorpe made a brief non-stop tour of the local slums, and he had this to say about the housing problem.
To hear the Prime Minister speak, you'd almost think that the problem of bad housing had been solved. Well, it hasn't. There are still nearly 2 million slums, and some of them are here in Birmingham, and I've seen them and I've seen the rats in them.
A crash building programme was Mr. Thorpe's first answer to the problem, and he went on to spell out Liberal policy.
We would create 12 building corporations spanning the country to reinforce the 1,500 individual housing authorities, of whom many can only build in penny packets. We'd rate unoccupied property to discourage hoarding. We'd abolish the Land Commission, and after 9 months we'd ask owners of empty property to show reason why that property shouldn't be used as temporary shelter for the homeless. The government are far too smug about housing, and the homeless are no subject for complacency.
A final bout of handshaking, and Mr. Thorpe was away to Chippenham on the last stage of his Hoverstop marathon. He'll be spending the rest of the campaign in his own marginal constituency.